Hey everybody, today we want to talk about another Big Pharma lawsuit. This one involves the prescription drug Tamiflu, manufactured by Genentech, which is owned by Roche Pharmaceuticals. Now, the reason why this is so important is because Tamiflu is a very commonly prescribed drug for indications of people with flu-like symptoms, and it's marketed as a drug that will help alleviate flu-like symptoms and even help prevent you from getting the flu if you've been exposed to it. Now, what's interesting about this lawsuit, it's a 68-page document that I've gone through. It's very, very interesting. And again, I want to talk about it a little bit because it highlights, this is just another instance of Big Pharma basically defrauding us. This time they defrauded the government, allegedly, and that is why they are really, really in big trouble. So let's get right to it. So this lawsuit, filed on behalf of 28 states and Washington, D.C., alleges that the company violated the False Claims Act. Now, the False Claims Act, states that you cannot falsely present or cause to be presented any false or fraudulent claims for payment or approval to the U.S. government. Okay, apparently what Roche did was, through false studies and biased data, convinced our government to buy enough doses of Tamiflu to, quote unquote, prevent a pandemic. Pandemic meaning is an epidemic that can cross continents. Basically lied to the government, which led to their purchase of $1.4 billion worth of Tamiflu, which was stockpiled in the event or to prevent a massive influenza outbreak. Now, the problem with that is, as the complaint goes on in great detail, to note that the drug doesn't do anything it really claims to do. So let me give you some of the highlights, because again, it is an extensive document. So some of the allegations against Roche, the clinical data that they provided the government does not support Tamiflu's intended benefits or stated benefits. They selectively cited their studies. They obfuscated and suppressed data that was counter to their claims by hiring lobbyists, key opinion leaders, and ghostwriters. They also downplayed adverse effects of taking the drug, those negative effects, side effects, which may actually outweigh the benefits. In addition, they talked about the medical writers that were basically ghostwriters or consultants, or in some cases even employees of Roche, to supply studies and data and articles, all biased. They did this with no raw data provided. So the problem here is that the medical journals who wrote about Tamiflu and whatnot were all operating off of incomplete data, biased data, and were not given the raw data. So the company used studies mostly conducted by professionals who had been or were paid consultants, along with authors who were actually employed by Roche. That's insane. No other independent study has been able to replicate the results of the tainted studies. Meaning, so the tainted studies, which said that Tamiflu was effective, no other independent study since then has been able to replicate those positive results. Those results that were in favor of Roche, and again, which ultimately led to the government buying $1.4 billion worth of doses to stockpile. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services directly stated that one of the critical assumptions underlying its purchase of Tamiflu for the pandemic stockpile was the drug's claimed efficacy in decreasing the risk of pneumonia, decreasing hospitalizations by about half, and decreasing mortality. Now, the problem here is the FDA, going back a little bit, this is all coming out now, but the FDA, as way back as in 1999, when Roche first submitted its new drug application for Tamiflu, indicating its treatment for uncomplicated acute illness from influenza infection in adults, the FDA concluded in its medical review back in 1999 that treatment with Tamiflu only confers a modest, this is quoted, modest benefit in terms of reducing the duration of uncomplicated influenza illness. And then I think it was just about 1 day. So that's all they could come up with as a possible benefit, and specifically concluded that the clinical trial did not support an indication that treatment reduces the severity of symptoms. So the FDA back in 1999 said that this doesn't, maybe it decreases how long you have these symptoms by a day, but it does not reduce the severity of those symptoms, which means it doesn't work. The FDA found that the method used by Roche, I'm just looking at my notes here, was inappropriate and unsupportive because the symptom scores were arbitrarily chosen numbers without giving any clinical significance to individual symptoms. That is massively biased. They cherry-picked the positive outcomes that they wanted. Now, specifically, the FDA noted the absence of any information on whether Tamiflu was effective in preventing influenza-related complications. There was no information provided that proved that in their submission. So again, Roche resubmitted it in 2000, and trying to again push it through. It got approved, but interesting here in April 2000. So finally, in April 2000, the FDA began to push back on the marketing. Now, Roche was marketing their product, mismarketing their product, making claims that Tamiflu did things that it did not do, and the FDA smacked their hands. I guess it wasn't serious enough. But back in April of 2000, the FDA began to push back on marketing statements Roche was using because they were not supported by Roche's data. In a letter to Roche, FDA identified a series of marketing claims that were misleading because the claim reductions in severity and incidence of infections was not supported by any substantial evidence. So what does that mean? Again, Roche was making claims that Tamiflu significantly reduced the symptoms of the flu and could help prevent it, neither of which did the FDA agree with ever. So some of the materials that the FDA told Roche to immediately cease disseminating was quotes like taglines like "the pill with the power to stop the flu." Not true. "Tame the flu with Tamiflu." "Tamiflu will reduce the duration of the flu by 31%. Again, not true. "Tamiflu will reduce the severity of influenza symptoms by 38%. Not true. Okay, and then lastly, "Tamiflu reduces the incidence of..." Not true. Okay. Now, what happened? Now, this is 99 and 2000. Millions and millions of doses of Tamiflu have been prescribed, and now what happened was there was a whistleblower that came out who had the guts to say, you know what? I'm going to do my independent research. Now, this guy maybe it's a code name or what, I don't know, but his name is Relator Thomas Jefferson, or at least that's what he's referred to as in the lawsuit. He's a citizen of the UK, lives in Italy, and with a specialty in public health. He has several degrees and certificates. He's written more than over 200 articles and co-authored 5 books. So he says that basically the benefit does not outweigh the risk of negative side effects, the side effects being nausea, anxiety, depression, and psychosis. In 2009, this guy tried to get the raw data from Roche. The company would not give it to him. So finally, it took him 4 years to get the data. So from 2009 to 2013, he was denied the raw data that Roche originally used to submit to the FDA, to submit to the government, to show that Tamiflu was effective in preventing the spread of influenza, which it does not. So what did he do when he finally got the raw data? He collected 107 clinical studies. Now, here are some of his findings. He agreed that Tamiflu actually did reduce the duration of the symptoms, but only by about 10%. That's it. Now, that's all the positive that he came up with. Here's the other stuff he came up with. No credible evidence that Tamiflu reduced the risk of complications of influenza, particularly pneumonia, nor reduced the risk of hospitalization or death. Had no significant effect on the rate of bronchitis, sinusitis, or other diseases related to the flu. His investigation determined that a claim that Tamiflu prevented the transmission or spread of influenza from person to person was false. So it does not prevent the spreading of influenza. This was because Tamiflu minimally reduced the risk of developing symptomatic influenza, but it had no effect on the reduction of asymptomatic influenza, which is important. Now, in other words, Tamiflu did not prevent a person with the flu from infecting another person. That's very important. Further, the minimal reduced risk of developing influenza symptoms was of a smaller magnitude than seen in hand washing to prevent severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS. So basically what they're saying is like, yeah, washing your hands is a way to prevent yourself from getting SARS is equivalent, basically a great comparison of the benefits of Tamiflu in helping you to not get the flu. So it's not very effective at all in even reducing the duration of the symptoms, let alone you getting the symptoms or getting the flu or spreading the flu. And this is incredible because this is such a common drug. And I highlight this because it's once again another pharmaceutical company that has sandbagged us for years and years to the tunes of billions of profits. The problem with Roche is they fucked with the government and they're going to get it now. This is going to be something to keep an eye on. How they get out of this one or how this gets settled will be very interesting. A couple more things that this whistleblower found. He further concluded that the minimal, and I'm reading all this, these are cliff notes and things I extracted from the 68-page complaint that the law firm that filed the suit was kind enough to send to me in a file. Relator further concluded that the minimal benefit of time to alleviation of symptoms was offset by the harms of Tamiflu. So the guy is basically saying, like, yeah, if you do get some relief in the duration of the symptoms you have with the flu, it doesn't offset the potential harms of taking the medication, which is so often true with a lot of prescription drugs. His analysis showed that when Tamiflu was used as a treatment for adults, there was an increase in nausea by 3.7% and an increase in vomiting by 5%, while there was a decrease in diarrhea. Okay. When Tamiflu was used as a prophylactic for adults, meaning like taking it to prevent getting the flu, there was an increase in headaches by 3% and an increase in nausea by 4%, as well as psychiatric effects and renal events. So you take this thing as a precaution, as a preventative, or to help reduce symptoms, and the fact of the matter is you have very little chance of getting any relief, and but you have a much greater chance of getting nausea, renal events. I don't want any renal events, and vomiting. So then lastly, I'll say, okay, so this whistleblower's thorough investigation and analysis of the available data makes his work the most comprehensive and reliable assessment of Tamiflu to date. Moreover, and as described in more detail below, related conclusions have been corroborated by other persons looking at Roche's claims about Tamiflu, including Roche's own selected team to recreate the conclusions reached by certain articles in the past. So, long story short, maybe not so short, but I mean, I could go on and on. This thing's pretty extensive, but these are important things. This is just another. We've seen Purdue Pharmaceuticals going out of business, filing for bankruptcy in the wake of the opioid epidemic. How many other prescriptions have been pulled from the market after billions in sales? Now, this one is just an outright, or is allegedly an outright fraud. It doesn't do anything to help prevent the flu, and almost nothing to help even reduce how long we have the symptoms from it. Who has our back? Not Big Pharma. I think this is incredibly important, and we need to be aware of this, and we need to be focused on this kind of stuff. A healthy body, treating our body and nourishing our body, and giving our body doses of good whole foods consistently, time after time, day after day, week after week, month after month, will build up our immune system. The processed foods, the processed meats, the chlorine, the fluoride, all of the environmental toxins are bombarding our system, damaging our immune system, damaging our gut microbiome, making us more and more susceptible to virus and other sicknesses. We need to take the power back. We need to take control back of our own health immediately. The Big Pharma does not have our back. The FDA doesn't have our back. Even though the FDA flagged this one as kind of bullshit early on, I'm looking at the company's website, and it basically says that the FDA has now approved Tamiflu for children 1 week or older. I mean, this is absolute insanity. And it's a racket. It's a racket all centered on making billions and billions of dollars. The FDA either has its head up its ass or is in bed with these companies because they seem to swap executives all the time. Or They're just asleep at the wheel. But regardless, these companies are motivated by profit, not to make us healthy and not to make us feel better. And enough is enough already. So there'll be more on this. I'm going to cut it right here. I've been through the complaint. Any questions, anything you want to talk about, anything you want to share, please lob it in here. I'd love to talk about it. All right.